Rewind to the year 1962, a year that saw humanity on the brink of a nuclear catastrophe. Picture a world where political tension hung heavy in the air, like a fog that refused to lift, a world locked in the icy grip of the Cold War. This was a chess game between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, each move calculated, each decision weighted with the potential for nuclear annihilation. Across the ocean, the tiny island of Cuba was a powder keg waiting to ignite. Fidel Castro had recently assumed power, riding the wave of the Cuban Revolution. Cuba, under Castro's rule, became a beacon of socialism just 90 miles off the American coast, intensifying the unease. The proliferation of nuclear weapons was not just a possibility but a chilling reality. The fear of nuclear war was not confined to the corridors of power. It was a global dread, a shadow that loomed over every home and every heart. This was the volatile stage onto which the Cuban Missile Crisis would explode. Our story now shifts to October 1962, a month that would forever be remembered in the annals of history. In the midst of the Cold War, an American U-2 spy plane, soaring high above the Caribbean, made a startling discovery. The photographs it captured revealed an unsettling truth. The Soviet Union was constructing missile bases in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. This marked a significant escalation in the already tense standoff between the two superpowers. As the news reached the White House, President Kennedy and his advisors grappled with the gravity of the situation. The stakes were higher than ever. The presence of Soviet missiles in Cuba threatened to shift the balance of power and brought the threat of nuclear war to America's doorstep. Following days of intense deliberations, President Kennedy and his advisors decided on a course of action. Instead of launching an immediate military strike, which could potentially ignite a full-scale nuclear war, they opted for a more measured approach. A naval blockade around Cuba. This quarantine, as Kennedy preferred to call it, aimed to prevent any further Soviet military supplies from reaching Cuban shores. The blockade was announced to the nation and the world on October 22nd. The move was a direct challenge to the Soviet Union, a clear message that the United States would not tolerate the placement of nuclear weapons so close to its borders. The world held its breath as it waited for the Soviet response. Would they back down or escalate the situation further? Days turned into nights and nights into days as the world stood on the brink of nuclear war. The tension was palpable, not just in the corridors of power in Washington and Moscow, but in homes and streets across the world. As naval ships took their positions around Cuba, the fate of millions hung in the balance, with the world waiting to see whether diplomacy or destruction would prevail. As the world watched with bated breath, the fate of millions hung in the balance. In the face of mounting pressure, the leaders of the superpowers were left with a critical decision. The world held its collective breath as President Kennedy and Premier Khrushchev engaged in secret negotiations to resolve the Cuban Missile Crisis. The stakes were high, the tension palpable. The final agreement was a masterstroke of diplomacy. The Soviets would remove their missiles from Cuba, the US would pledge not to invade the island nation, and in a secret concession, America would also remove its own missiles from Turkey. The world exhaled in relief as the crisis was averted. The immediate aftermath was a mix of relief, disbelief, and a newfound respect for the power of negotiation over military might. It was a victory for diplomacy, a testament to the power of dialogue over the drumbeats of war. This resolution had a profound impact on US-Soviet relations. The crisis was a stark reminder of the potential devastation that could result from escalating tensions. It led to a renewed focus on diplomatic solutions and set a precedent for future negotiations between the two superpowers. It was a turning point in the Cold War, a moment where the world veered away from the precipice of nuclear disaster. It was a lesson learned in the most harrowing of circumstances, a lesson in the importance of diplomacy, communication, and mutual respect in international relations. The Cuban Missile Crisis, a chilling reminder of the brinkmanship of the Cold War era, had finally come to an end. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 serves as a stark reminder of the potential for catastrophe when nuclear powers clash. This crisis underscored the importance of diplomacy and negotiation over military action. It was a pivotal lesson that steered future arms control agreements, demonstrating the power of peaceful resolution over the brinkmanship of war. This episode in history showed us that even in the shadow of the most formidable threats, there is always a route to peace. In the face of potential disaster, humanity found a path to peace, a lesson as relevant today as it was in 1962.